Hi, my name is Cécile Baumann and I'm your host as well as the founder of GanzinBewegung. I'm a movement and Alexander Technique specialist passionate about helping individuals enhance their mind-body connection. At GanzinBewegung, we serve holistic thinkers who are eager to improve their overall well-being and understanding of themselves through movement. I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's interview with the remarkable Jeremy Chance, a highly regarded authority in the field of the Alexander Technique. With a career spanning over 5 decades, Jeremy has dedicated his life to studying and teaching this transformative practice. Before we bring Jeremy into the conversation, let me take a moment to explain what I mean by mind-body connection. The GanzinBewegung system we developed encompasses 7 defining components of being human: movement, body awareness, our surroundings, personal experiences, emotions, thought processes, and breathing. These elements are all interconnected, creating a holistic framework that influences how we live and interact with the world around us. With that context in mind, today we are excited to dive into our discussion with Jeremy Chance. He began his journey in 1969, training in London during the 70s before continuing his education under Marjorie Barstow in the 80s. Let's explore his insights and experiences in this fascinating field. Jeremy is the author of Principles of the Alexander Technique, a significant work that has been translated into 7 languages, making the vital knowledge accessible to audiences worldwide. From 1985 to 2002, he served as the publisher and educator of Direction, a well-respected journal on the Alexander Technique, and was a founding member of Ausstatt in Australia. In 1999, Jeremy moved to Japan and founded Body Chance, which became one of the largest and most esteemed school for Alexander Technique teacher education globally. After selling the school, he continued to influence the field by teaching at the same place where he imparts Alexander's discoveries to students. In addition to his work with the Alexander Technique, Jeremy explores its intersection with Buddhist practices through his Body Dharma classes. In these sessions, he examines how well individuals cooperate with their human design, emphasizing that much physical suffering arises from distorted concepts of movement. Join us as we engage with Jeremy Chance about his extensive experience, insights into teaching, and perspectives on the evolution of the Alexander Technique. Welcome, Jeremy. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
It's
With over
wonderful.
5 decades of experience in the Alexander Technique,
I
and
know
you're unique.
it's too many. It means I'm old. That's what it means. It means I'm old.
But still, it's worth telling people how long you're already in this
It
field.
does. And it certainly, I would say just in the last 10 years, I finally feel like I understand the work.
Oh, no, no way. I'm not that far yet, but yeah, I have time probably. Wow, 5 decades, yes. Let's give it a chance if I ever will understand this technique.
Mm.
I've met you the first time in Berlin at the Alexander Technique Congress and loved your workshop very much. It
Thank
was
you. Well,
impressive.
when I say understand, I think your understanding keeps changing and changing, but I feel like my understanding these days has reached a point where it seems more stable.
Ah, okay. That's a better a better thinking about it. Otherwise, we get frustrated as teachers,
Absolutely.
you're never finished. That's
Mm.
one of the good thing, I think. But
Yeah, it's
still,
like martial arts, isn't it? I mean, you never
yeah,
finish. You get
yeah.
black belt 1, 2, 3, 4. You keep going up.
Yeah, that's true. Your journey into the Alexander Technique began in 1969. What personal challenges or experiences led you to discover this practice, and how did they shape your understanding of body awareness?
Well, I have two answers to that. The simple answer is that when I was very young, my father had a very bad back and he used to use a cane. And then suddenly, as a young child, he threw the cane away and he was throwing us around. And so this thing called Alexander Technique always had a very positive feeling for me. But as I got older, there was a long experience I went through, which is too long to talk about here. That's another whole podcast. But at the end of it, I remember I was in a lot of confusion. I'd been talking with friends, and I decided, no, I had to figure this out myself. And I drove the car, and I ended up parking the car. And then when I got out of the car, I began to feel a bit silly. Why am I here? And then I went back and I realized I'd locked the keys in the car, which back in those days you could do. We're talking about the 70s now. So then I thought, okay, I'll walk home. And as I was walking up the street, I started to see just people in fear. And it was remarkable. Like I remember seeing a couple, and the woman was sort of, like that. And obviously, love me, love me, love me, please. And the guy was sort of like that, saying, don't take me over, don't take me over. Yet if I'd looked at them normally, I would have just thought, oh, a happy couple laughing and walking down the street. And then more and more as I went on, I just saw how fear was distorting people's, not just their bodies, but their personalities, their whole being, their whole expression. And in that moment, there was this voice, really. I mean, I'm quite a spiritual person, and there was just a voice that said that, you have to go and study Alexander. It's about love and fear. And at that point, I just signed up in one of the hardest schools in all of Australia for theatre. And I'd only been there the first term. And I literally, this experience was so powerful. I walked in the next day and I just said, I'm leaving. And then I went to London and trained. So, my original idea about the work is that it was something very profound about love and fear and how that distorts our body, how our emotions, our feelings, our thoughts are expressed physically. As Alice Miller said, the body never lies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And as a father of 2 daughters, can you tell us a story about how the Alexander Technique influenced your parenting?
Well, it did. I realized, in the older days, we talked about stopping and inhibition, but that, if you talk that way with children, they end up getting stiff. They just sort of they feel like they can't do anything. So I started to find language which was more positive, like about yeses. Anyway, my daughter was in charge of this relay race. So she was about 9, I think, or 8 sometime at the time. And I was there watching her coaching them. And I said to her, look at that boy, the way he's running, when we went home later that night. I said, he's moving his head, he's moving his whole body. You run with your legs, darling. You use your legs. Just tell him to use his legs. Anyway, a week later, his mother came around and said, oh, thank you so much. Angelica's really helped my boy with his running. And I went there and I saw it. And then she's screaming at him, use your legs. You run with your legs. And he was really running with his legs. He'd and because he was focusing more on his legs, he'd stopped all the wiggling and he got faster. And the lady who was doing the coaching the other team went to Angelica and said, oh, can you help us, coach? And Angelica said, yes, I can, but after the race is over. So,
Clever girl.
My girls always just used Alexander when they needed it. They always thought highly of it. Like the other one, she's told me one day, she was in this large Christian school with about 1,000 students there. And she said one day, one of the girls came, how come you got such good posture? And she said, what are you talking about? She said, well, I just see you at the desk. You're always sitting up like that. You never slouch. And she didn't have an awareness of it. She wasn't consciously trying to have good posture. She just obviously had that influence of myself, and my wife was also is also an Alexander teacher. She doesn't practice anymore. So I feel like with the children, it was more about when they were interested, tell them, and also be the model. And that worked. They both have quite good coordination these days. Grown up now, 25 and 22.
Your Body Dharma classes explore the intersection between the Alexander Technique and Buddhist practices. How do these 2 philosophies complement each other in your teaching? What unique insights do students gain from this integration of those?
Yeah, I think there are 2 things really. I think the primary thing is that, there's nothing wrong with us. Like we already are perfectly formed. This is very much a teaching in Buddhism. It's the idea of the mirror covered by mud. So, you like the mirror there, if that's covered by mud, then it can't reflect. So it doesn't look like it's a mirror anymore. But if you just take the mud off, then the mirror's there. And it never stopped being a mirror. It was always a mirror, but it would cover it over. And I think the same is true with Alexander, is that we already have a perfectly wonderful movement system that's been evolving over 500 million years, that is inherited not just by human beings, all vertebrates. In fact, if we make the picture bigger, it's chordata, the chordata phylum, where we have a brain and a notochord, a spine, if you like. And that system is perfect. You can't improve upon it. It's already working, and it's working well. But what's happened is that through various reasons, like we get the idea, I'm too tall, so we start to do something to stop ourselves being tall, and we do it so often we forget that we've done it until that just becomes the norm of who we are. We just move as that not too tall person, but we identify that as being ourselves when it's not at all. It's something we've added to ourselves. So it's like the mud I was saying on the mirror. We collect all these habits, and they're like mud on the mirror. And so the postural movement system, which I call it these days, that is the evolutionary movement system that we inherited, is basically smothered. It's basically smothered and distorted by all of our ideas and our thoughts. And so that leads on to the second idea, is that a lot of our suffering is caused by how we think, by what we believe, the stories we tell ourselves. You know, I remember I worked once with a violinist in the Kyoto Symphony Orchestra, and she was having a really difficult problem with her arm. And that was in this arm, the bowing arm, that's right. And I started to watch her, and she was doing this, and I thought, oh, okay, what does she think of her arm? What does she think about her arm? So I said, tell me where your arm begins. And she said, here. I said, no, it doesn't. Your arm begins here. She said, oh, really? And what I saw was that because she had this belief, she'd get to this point, and then she'd try to go up by pushing this down. And that's when she was getting all the pain. And I said, no, when it goes up. When you do your bowing, it goes up. And she went, oh my God. And all the pain was gone. And that was a simple lesson. It's not always that easy, but sometimes it can be that simple. Change the idea, you change the movement, and the suffering stops. The suffering is simply a sign that there is something that needs attention. You know, I often like to say, pain is what is right about you. It's not what's wrong about you. Pain is the messenger. You know, don't blame the messenger. The trouble is, of course, people don't know what to do about it. And that's where it's so wonderful that Alexander discovered what he did. So I see those two things, the inherent perfection that we already have, together with the way we distort that. And the distortions, they're the things that we have to change. You know, my Marge used to say, she said, well, she was up in Nebraska. She came from Midwest Nebraska. She had this said, she said, well, this is very easy. It's your old habits that are hard. And that's true. It's all the mud, all the things we add on that we don't even know we added on. That's what makes it a process, why it takes time.
So true, so true. It's actually so easy, and we make it so hard.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, it's because we get confused. I think we get lost in our own conception of how we are and how other people are, and we live inside of that, and we don't realize that sometimes the habit is the thing that's causing the problem that it's trying to solve.
You founded an Alexander Technique school in Japan. That became successful before you sold it. What were some key challenges you faced in managing the school, and what lessons did you learn that could benefit other educators looking to establish their own institutions?
Well, I think there's a dynamic between the market, the people who might come to your school, and your educational needs. Now, when I first started out in Japan, I followed the STAT model, which was, 1,600 hours over 3 years, 30 weeks a year, a minimum of, I think, 4 or 5 days of 3-hour classes. I followed that model. And that was all right in the beginning because I was very lucky. I landed in Japan and there was a whole group of people who wanted to train, and I was the first person who could train. But then what slowly started to happen was that those people, most of them stayed, but some drifted away. And after about 3 or 4 years, the school was falling apart. I mean, there were not new people coming in. The people who were there were leaving. I remember, lying in bed at night you know, like the anime with those big eyes going blink, 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 lying in my bed at night, looking up at the ceiling at 2 a.m, just absolute terror, because I had, you know, 2 children who were at that stage about 3 and 5 or 6. And, you know, I was already in my 40s, and my wife didn't really have a profession that she could do. She was anyway looking after the youngest at home. And it was like, what was I going to do? I couldn't go back to university. So I kind of realized that I had to become a master of business. I had to figure out how to make a business work. And that was the breakthrough, because then I began to listen to the people who wanted to come. And what I discovered was, and this is a very important idea that, you know, if people are thinking of starting a school or anything, this is what they should write down, that people loved the service, which is Alexander lessons and everything that came from it and the experiences they had. They loved that, but they hated the product. And the product is, where do I go? You know, how many times do I have to go? What time of day is it on? You know, how long is each session? How many teachers are there? All of those things, that's the product. And what I discovered was that people loved Alexander, but they hated the product. And the product, when I was there, was like that it's like a huge wall. It was like 3 years and that's it. You know, you have to sign up for 3 years, or 4 years in my case, because I had a 4-year school. And it was just daunting. So what I started to do is I started to experiment with different models. Now, the most important thing, I think, of anyone who's thinking of starting a school, you must have a public-facing program. You can't just have a school all by itself. You have to have a public-facing program which is constantly on a leading edge of discovering what is people interested in, how can I communicate with them, how can I attract them? Because we found very significantly that we had a very extensive public program all the time. And out of the public program, for every 100 people who would come into the program, about 15 would go into the training school. So if we only had a few people out the front, we didn't get people in the back. But the training school was what helped the business survive. That was, you know, what we call the front end and the back end. The front end being, you don't really make a lot of money, but eventually some people decide, no, I really want to study this technique, and they go to the back end. Well, the back end is like, I mean, in Japan, it costs $40,000 or $50,000 over a number of years to train to be a teacher. But once people got into that, they loved it and they enjoyed it and they wanted to stay. So I guess my big learning was that you have to, there's a creative dynamic between what you need to do to ensure there's an education standard based against what people can actually do in terms of their lives. And in Japan, and it's probably true anywhere in the world, people are either, they have plenty of money and no time, or they have plenty of time and no money. So both of those require flexibility. So that became one of the key, if you like, values, was flexibility. Tried to make it as easy as possible for people to study Alexander. Tried to give them as much freedom as we possibly could find out about how they could organize their busy schedule so they could fit us in. And then the other principle I worked a lot with is diversity. It's like, try to have a school that's very rich, which offers a lot of variety and diversity, because if you look in nature, the strongest environments are the most diverse. As soon as you get environments which are very focused and monocultural, then they're not as healthy. That the diversity is often a sign of health. So those two values used to shape the school, the diversity and the flexibility. And it took me about 7 years to build the model. Finally, I was able to build a model which was based on modules, which was really hard to do. I mean, how do you divide up the undividable? You know, with Alexander is like one thing, but how do you make it to parts? And so I made these 2 courses in the end, Body Thinking and Thinking Body. And people did get confused, and I meant them to get confused, because it was like 2 sides of the same coin. You know, it's like in one side, Body Thinking was about understanding the anatomical and movement relationships. How do heads move? How do spines move? How do arms move? You know, arms don't begin here. Arms begin here. Heads don't go here. Heads are right up here. The spine's right up here. It's not down here. All of these kind of things I think are very important. And so we slowly developed a system of modules so people could just, it was just 2 years initially. and it was just like one weekend, maybe 2 weekends, one single day, twice a month. And people suddenly thought, oh, okay, that's doable. And it was like a rush. It's like suddenly all of these people started to come and sign up. It was like the school just went whoosh, like that, because now we were offering a service which people could adapt. So I think it's so important. And of course, you know, we left the whole stat world and all of those rules they have, because the rules don't make any more sense in today's world. Maybe they did back in the 30s and 40s when they were originally, I mean, the 50s and 60s, I mean, when they were originally developed, but they have no meaning now. I mean, even universities are offering diverse education and online education. So anyway,
Mm-hmm.
it's a long answer, but I think it's a very important thing to firstly make sure you've got a public program so that you're always interfacing with people, and second, be flexible in your model. Make sure that you create a service that people can actually attend. I mean, a product that people can actually use.
That to be agile and, flexible and adapt quickly
Yes,
because
and that's
it's going
happening
so
in
fast.
all education, I think, not just in
Mhm.
Alexander. That's happening everywhere. People are, and you know, what with the advent of chatbots and all those things, I mean, even
Mhm.
universities may get out of date within 10 years, you know.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. So you've been involved with Alexander Technique for many years. How have you seen teaching method evolve? Are there particular trends or approaches that resonate with you? Not only Alexander, it can also be other methods.
Yeah,
What
well,
methods impressed you?
I think one thing that's quite, I'm not sure impressive is quite the word, but certainly fascinating is what's happening in pain science.
Hmm.
You know, in the last 10 years in academic circles anyway, there's been a revolution in pain science where they basically, you know, broken the link between tissue damage equals pain or pain equals tissue damage. That, you know, that link is not so strong anymore. Pain is a response to tissue damage, but there can be pain without tissue damage, and there can be tissue damage without pain. This is something that in academia now, and the biomedical model, which is, you know, I've got pain, something's wrong, fix the thing that's wrong, the pain will go. That model is basically discredited these days. Now they talk about biopsychophysical or biosocial, biopsychosocial. That's right, biopsychosocial. That chronic pain is a biopsychosocial problem.
Hmm.
What's really interesting is that slowly they're coming to the same conclusions that we've already been involved in for many decades. That, for example, you know, they realize that pain has a physical element, and it has a psychological element, and it has a social element. For example, lots of studies to show that chronic long-term pain is much higher in poorer socioeconomic groups than it is in richer socioeconomic groups. So just the atmosphere, the sense of anxiety or worry about your job can be a cause to affect chronic pain. But on the same time, for example, other studies have shown that people who have pain have not got very good maps. So the whole body mapping thing, the course that I was telling you about, the one we devised, Body Thinking, that's becoming very important. People need to learn what is the structure, what is happening in my body where I'm feeling this pain, and how does that relate to other parts of my body. But then, of course, there's a psychological thing, is that, for example, now in the medical world, they're saying don't give MRIs, don't show MRIs to the customers, to the patients, because that terrifies them. They look at the MRI and they see all this damage and they think, oh my God, I'm really, my spine is in a terrible state. And that thought itself produces more pain. So there's just, and you know, as I've been studying this, I've come to the conclusion, well, Alexander Teacher is like actually ideally situated to be dealing with chronic pain, which is one of the largest problems in the world today. Chronic pain is a huge problem. I mean, I don't have the numbers at hand, but I think, you know, out of 10, we're talking about maybe 2 or 3 people at some point in their lives suffering from chronic pain. So that's one thing I think is interesting. And I don't know if Alexander is going to have an influence in that area. I know one of the leading academics in the pain science world will be talking at the next Congress, which is exciting. I was involved in helping to organize that, so that's really good. But I think Alexander teaches this is maybe an area of strength that they don't realize they have, because, you know, the psychologists are saying, well, we can deal with the psychological stuff, but we don't know anything about the physical. And then the physical therapists are saying, well, we can do the physical stuff, but we don't know about the psychology. But of course, an Alexander teacher, you have to deal with both. You have to talk to somebody and convince them about thinking in a different way. And then it's a very physical thing that you're using your hands. So we are actually in this very clear, what's happening in the academia is this clear kind of slow come together, the physical side, the psychological side, the social side, realizing unless all of these are dealt with together, chronic pain can't be treated successfully.
Yeah. First, you have to know where the pain is generated somehow. It's a psychological issue. Is it the body? Is it the social surrounding? As you said, you have to figure out with the person together. It's
That's
not
right.
I tell you what's wrong. It's really
No, exactly.
asking and the coaching of where the pain is coming from, what is making you having pain. And
That's right.
that's what I love about this technique. I think
Yes,
it's so interesting. It's so
like
so
being a
fun.
detective. It's like being a detective. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, detective.
yeah.
As
Every good
some
Alexander teacher is a good detective. I think that's part of the job.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, before you said about body thinking, and there
Mm.
is also the thinking body.
Yes.
So for people, and also for me, what is thinking body for you?
Well, this is, when I developed these two modules, they're both with 2-year full-time modules, and I developed an extensive video program, which is now available online. If people want to study it, they can. But thinking body was more the the beliefs and ideas I have about myself can distort. Like the example I gave earlier in the interview, if I think I'm too tall and I distort
Mhm.
myself. But we have hundreds of these ideas. We develop opinions or thoughts about ourselves or concerns or worries about the outside world. And these stories we tell ourselves are often the source of pain. So thinking body is as body thinking is more about the body and how you think. But thinking body is more how you're thinking about yourself and your body and thinking about the world and how you manage. So it's more of a, if you like, more on the psychological side, whereas body thinking is more on the physical side. But the two of them are both Alexander's discovery. They're both involved in figuring out, what am I doing that I don't need to be doing that's causing me to suffer?
Mhm. So interesting.
Mm.
As someone deeply committed to learning, how do you continue to develop your understanding of the Alexander technique? Are there particular practices or resources that inspire you?
Well, I think for me, the main way is by interacting with students. It's like that's the leading edge. That's the mind face. Um, and when I sold Body Chance to Zen Place is a large organization in Japan with about 130 studios, and they teach Pilates and yoga. So when I started to work for them, I realized that the kind of language I'd been using before, which was more for musicians, because the original Body Chance was much more orientated towards musicians, I had to find another way of communicating. So, you're asking what resources I use. Well, in that case, I started to study science, brain science and neuroscience, and started to think, is there a way to explain Alexander's work that would make sense to them? Because, if you look at what the list of things Pilates does and the list of things Alexander does, I mean, on paper, they look the same. So why would anyone who does Pilates want to do Alexander? That was the question that faced me. And that's when I began to understand that Alexander discovered what I call the postural movement system. He discovered this much more ancient, um, 500 million year evolved system of movement, which was absolutely perfect and was unconscious and could not be accessed directly. And that what we do is we have a voluntary movement system, which
Mhm.
is, how I learned to do new things, how I learned to play darts, how I learned to kick a ball, even indeed how I learned to crawl and how I learned to stand and how I learned to work. Voluntary movement system is how I consciously decide to put together sequences of movements in order to be able to do something. But the postural movement system is not like that. And when you look at the science, there's no real definition of the postural movement system. It's not there. They do have a definition of involuntary movement, unconscious movement, but they usually talk about that as being part of the autonomic nervous system, like parasympathetic and the sympathetic, fight or flight, all those kind of movements, or standard reflexes, or they talk about the fact that, for example, walking, sitting, all of those movements eventually become unconscious. We don't think about them. But at some point we did, you see. We didn't come out walking. We had to learn how to walk. We had to learn those things. But now they become unconscious. But the postural movement system is not unconscious in that way. It's not, that's not the postural movement system. Postural movement system is more like what happens to control temperature or levels of oxygen. It's like it's a very automatic primal system that's at the core. It's sort of in the brainstem and going higher. And it will still work. You could take out most of the brain. You could still walk. It's primary. And it can't be interfered with, but it can be suppressed. And that's what we do. Through these voluntary movements, we suppress it. So, back to your question, how do I challenge myself? How do I develop? It's really by facing different students and discovering that, Alexander's needs to be presented in a way that makes sense to them. That's a really important part, I think, of the development of teaching. That's why I said earlier that I felt like my understanding is stabilizing, because as I started to try to explain Alexander in science terms, in terms of discoveries that are already made, it was just like a jigsaw puzzle. It all just started to fit so perfectly. And now, I've got a list of research questions that I have, which there is no research being done.
Yet.
No, yet.
Hopefully soon.
Well, we're talking decades. We're talking maybe another 100 years,
But you never know how humans...
And I'm writing about that in my blog at the moment. I've just started a whole series on recruitment, which I won't go into too much detail, but recruitment is just how do you decide which every muscle has non-fatigable fibers and fatigable fibers. And how do you decide which ones you're going to recruit? Well, there is a principle that says we'll do the non-fatigable ones first and build up to the fatigable ones as we go. But somehow that's not working. So I'm writing at the moment about the actual coordination in Alexander terms involves a huge, massive neuronal change at the level of the cellular level of muscles. And again, as I do this work, there's lots of empirical evidence that supports it, but there's no science. No science can explain these things. Not yet.
Not yet.
No.
Yeah, let's talk about your blog a bit more. The blog is named Jeremy's Sometimes Daily, features an intriguing variety of topics, from practical advice about arms to personal reflections and on awareness. How do you decide what to write about and what inspires your blog content?
It's mainly what I'm trying to figure out. It's like a public way of me figuring stuff out. So, I decided I wanted to get into all this whole level of recruitment at a deep down the physiological level, at the level of muscle cells. So I just started to write about that. I've got one blog I'm working on at the moment. Sometimes the blogs come quickly. Sometimes I'll have to spend days. Thank God for ChatGPT. I go and ask it a lot of questions. It gives me good results and answers. So, it's my learning edge. And I say sometimes daily, because what I'll usually do is I'll get a topic and I might just go at that topic, and I might write every day for maybe a week or 2 weeks or even 3 weeks, and then I'll just stop. So I don't kind of write as a regular sort of thing. I'm stopping and starting. So I think, if people are interested in some of the things I'm saying, then the best thing is just to hop onto that blog. And, sometimes I have people say to me, sometimes I get your blog, I don't have any idea what you're talking about. And I said, I don't bother reading it. Other days, I love it. I love it. It's something fantastic. So, you don't have to read them all. You can get through 1 or 2 lines and you think, no, I think this is one of these kind of blogs. I don't want to read that today. But you'll definitely always have variety. And I tried to keep it like at a practical level. Like even this recruitment thing, I'm trying to bring it back to everyday practical applications. So, you know, indeed, if you went back and look at my blogs, there's actually a lot of stuff there to help you understand how to use Alexander's discovery in your own life. I kind of want to focus on giving people some kind of level of information like that, you know.
Looking ahead, what is your vision for your future work within the Alexander Technique at the same place? Are
Well,
there new projects or initiatives on the horizon that excites you?
yes, well, I mean, as far as Zen Place goes, it feels like I'm back at the beginning again, like I was with originally Body Chance was called ATA, Alexander Technique Associates. But then the business guy I had advising me then said, that's a terrible name. People were scared of Alexander Technique, call it something else. And you've done that. You've built a new system to help describe it. I think that's very important, that you need to again, as I said, match your market, talk to your market, talk to in use language in ways that people understand. But I think, you know, so that's it's in place. I've realized that the old model I had, which was, you know, all come to one studio and then bring teachers from overseas, kind of that model doesn't really make any, it's not relevant. That's the old Body Chance model. That model worked when there were no real experienced teachers in Japan. And I just had to have one studio for people to come to. But now I'm working for an organization that has 130 studios. And there are now, you know, and I've trained around more than 140 teachers. So it's like we don't really need visiting teachers coming over all the time. We've got plenty of teachers in Japan. So I'm trying to design a decentralized model of Alexander training, which I think could happen around the world. I think it could happen worldwide. But it's like, for example, you know, you probably have students and they probably, you know, one day if you said, would you be interested in training? They would, but they don't want to stop coming to you. Again, it's this whole service and product thing that yes, I wouldn't mind training, but I don't want to stop coming to you. Can I keep coming to you and train? And of course, the answer now is no, you can't. But what I'm trying to build in Japan is that yes, you can. And what happens if, as long as that teacher is part of the certified training program, you will get credits. And if that teacher ever stops teaching, doesn't matter. We've got your credits. We've got the central office. We can take you to another teacher who's certified to be involved in the program. So I'm trying to build decentralized learning so that really you probably spend your first maybe 3 or 4 years just having workshops, going to classes, enjoying yourself, learning, not necessarily thinking about teaching. And then eventually, of course, there are some courses which start now to bring you in. Okay, are you interested in communicating this to other people? And then, of course, that's when they would study more with me. So this is very much in its embryonic stage. I mean, it took me 7 years to build the Body Chance model. So now I've got a 5-year contract with Zen Place, and I'm only on the 2nd year of the contract. And I wish I could say it's going well, but it's not going well at all. And so, you know, it's a challenge. It's a constant challenge. And so that's one thing. That's one thing. Another thing that I think I'd love to be able to do, I'm not sure quite, but I would love to take the idea of posture and make it popular. Like, for instance, if you ask a group of people, you say to them, what do you think are the most important things that influence your health? Well, they're always going to give you roughly the same answers. They're going to say, well, you know, what you eat, yeah. You know, exercise, although I don't do enough of it, they'll say. You know, your mental health, sleep, and some people say environment. But generally, and then I'll say, okay, that's great. Now, what else is there? You've forgotten one. And they go, hang on, diet, exercise, sleep, mental health, environment. They said, no, there's no other one. And I say, what about posture? And they go, oh, posture. And I say, yes, posture is more fundamental than those other 5 things. You have good posture, you'll sleep well. You have good posture, you'll digest better. You have good posture, your exercise will do the things it's supposed to do. You have good posture, your mental health, your irritation levels will drop. You'll be much, much happier. Posture is fundamental. But this is not an idea that is common in society. And that's what I'd like to do somehow. I've got an idea of writing a book called Posture Miracles, where I just take individual cases of different things and write about how Alexander transformed it. And again, you know, it's just amazing the breadth of things that Alexander's, the postural movement system can heal. So that would be, you know, if I could somehow find a way. I don't really know how, and I may not succeed, but that's, if you're asking me what my next big wish would be to popularize the idea of posture being a fundamental health influence in all ways, and that is a popular, well-known idea.
That's great. That's great because, GanzinBewegung, this system we developed, it's actually, I made a holistic posture improvement system out of it. I ask a question about the thinking, about the body, about the environment, about everything, the whole concept.
Yes,
And at the end, I show them what they can change, what needs a little bit of change or, adjustment to get a better posture, from a holistic view, not just stand in front of me and I make pictures from here and then here and then here and then here. And, it's just a momentary situation. It's not the whole. And I would really like to develop this more and make it more online so people can just go through for themselves and then search for a teacher and tell them, this is what I need and this is what, it takes it probably a bit easier.
Gives people more accessibility. I think that's one of the things that we have to do in our work. One of the challenges we have in Alexander work is it's so empty of any substance because, if my teacher Marge used to say, all you get is the absence of what you had, and it's like, that's nothing. She even said,
Thank you.
what you want is a little bit of nothing, she said. But the trouble with all you people is you all want something, and that something is your tension. So I think that's where, going back to AT success, what we were talking about before, one of the things that really also changed things was realizing that you can't just teach Alexander technique. You have to teach the way it can help you in your life at the moment, like whatever that is. So at Body Chance, we focused on classical musicians. And so instead of talking about what Alexander's discovery was about, we started talking about the problems that they had and how they might be solved and what was causing them. And of course, immediately then people were interested because that was something they'd been thinking about. And here was someone who was talking about what they'd been thinking about, but was saying something completely new that they'd never heard anyone say before. And that's how, I built a school. I think, the biggest Alexander school around usually was about 50 people, and that was often spread with multiple places. Well, we got to 140 people. We had 140 trainees in our school. It was more like a college. We had 4 directors in Japan. We had 5 overseas directors coming. And all of that was built on focusing in musicians mainly. We focused on musicians. That became our primary thing, although we did work with the yoga people and we did have people who just loved Alexander, Yeah. Anyway, I've been really enjoyed chatting here today. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today, Jeremy. Your insights, I mean, this is just a treat. It was so enriching and inspiring, and I mean, we could talk forever. I hope I see you soon again.
Thank you. Well, I hope we'll see each other at the Congress. I'll be there too. You're coming?
Oh, great. Yes, of course, of course. Wonderful. Yeah. So see you there. And for those eager to dive deeper into Jeremy's transformative work, I highly encourage you to visit his website at www.atsuccess.com. There you'll discover a rich area of resources designed to enhance your understanding and practice of the Alexander Technique. Sign up for his blog post today and enjoy enriching and thought-provoking content. Don't miss this opportunity to embark on a journey of personal development under the guidance of one of the foremost authorities in the Alexander Technique. Thank you all for listening. The recording of this interview will be available on our YouTube channel, and you can follow us for more content to come on our social platforms. Let us know how you found the event. Until next time, stay connected with your mind and body.